Anyway, good afternoon. Welcome to the African PhD Scholars Network, and of course to this virtual talk which we've called the Opportunity Series. My name, as you can see on the screen, Genevieve Bosa. I will be moderating this event, and I'm also the convener for this network. Now, it's a pleasure to be here today with you, to connect with you, and to share parts of our journey with you. As part of the introduction, as we started already, please tell us your name and where you're participating from in the chat and what stage you are at your PhD journey. If you're still a prospective student, current student, if you've finished, do tell us in the chat, would love to know. A few housekeeping rules just before we start. Please post your questions in the chat. We'll be taking questions from the chat, and if we do have time, we can ask people to unmute. All the mics have been muted automatically, so we just want to keep that as quiet as possible so that we can get the best from the session. We will post responses to questions that we don't take on LinkedIn. So any questions we're unable to take, we'll put them on LinkedIn. I'll begin with a brief introduction to the network, then I'll introduce the speakers and we'll take it from there. So I would share my screen, and this makes me feel like I'm back teaching in class, but I will share my screen so that I can talk you through the network, and then we would have just the speakers on the screen. I will pin them once we commence with the conversation. African PhD Network. Now, the philosophy behind this, as you can see from this, is that it takes a village. And I know we say that, especially when there is a child, it takes a village to raise a child. But indeed, for a PhD, I can see from experience and from people that we've spoken to that it does take a village to do a PhD. I know there are a number of people on this call who are aspiring or already pursuing a PhD. The PhD journey can be a lonely one, and it's very different from standard taught classroom activities, in your MA or in your undergraduate class. So in cases such as my own, one thing we've noticed is that we were lacking a sort of network. So we are a network of African academics, PhD scholars, candidates, PhD candidates, researchers, and we want to ensure that we foster community. It's been said that the PhD is very lonely. We want to ensure that we believe in collaboration, in growth, in conversation, so that every person that is part of this network can benefit at various points in their journey. So we want to build people up together. We want to ensure that wherever you are in your journey, there is something for you. Now, the network also, how does that adage go? It is someone who has told the path that can light the way. Or if you say it in pidgin English, that person who Sabi road, will show you the road. So what do? We connect you to a community of people that will offer you support in your journey. And we'll talk more about the support, what kind of support that we give. You would also have expert advice. People ensure, or most times, if we don't have an informed conversation, we can't make certain educated pieces of information. So expert advice, you would also be connected to people and resources. And speaking of resources, we would also be sharing some things we've put together for you about funding, about your proposal, about doing a PhD, so that you can get started on this journey. So this is just what we do: community support, expert advice, people, and some resources. Who is this network for? There are about 4 people target audience. Prospective PhD students, like I saw a few people that are aspiring PhD students. So this is for you, to give you the community, the resources for you to make this educated and informed decision on your journey. It's also for current PhD students because it's quite lonely. It can be tasking and challenging. But as a current PhD student, when you're writing, you want to start thinking of the future. So we also help build the bridge with academics, with researchers, where you can start to have conversations about post-PhD opportunities. Now, this network is also for practitioners. We do have a number of people who have done a PhD but are not in academia. This is also for them because we want to ensure that whatever research they've done, we can tap into it and we can build on it. So we're building a bridge, we're building community, we're fostering collaborations. And we do all this through what we offer you. More like what we're doing today, virtual talk, we will also have masterclasses for you. And some of these masterclasses will be targeted at certain interventions you need if you are prospective, if you're already on your PhD journey, or if you're completing your PhD journey. We'll have these masterclasses that are specific to you, webinars and workshops. We're already talking with writing coaches. When I was doing my PhD, my school offered some writing workshops, but I did not think it was enough. So I had to go outside to look for certain things to adapt my writing. I came from a journalistic background, so I had to change the way I was writing to write it more academically. So we would have these kinds of workshops where we can talk about literature review, we can talk about proposal writing, writing up, and also presenting. Most times, I remember this story my supervisor told me when I wrote something and presented to him. He said, "Oh, the English was too flowery." I was like, is that a bad thing? You know, so workshops like this would help. Now, we'll also have professional and mentoring sponsored support, and we'll talk more about that as we go in with the speakers, with those on the panel, because we also support each other. We also mentor each other, and you would also have resources. And I mentioned towards the end, we will share we'll share a PDF that we've collated together. I will help you in thinking about something like your choice of supervisors. If you're thinking of your choice of supervisors, which we would also talk about, are you considering their availability or the interest in the topic? What are some tips you need to know in choosing your supervisor? You can also find out what is their supervision style. There's so much we can talk about concerning supervision, you know, literature review, data collection, your research proposal. Now, what we offer helps you in mapping your PhD journey. So this is a sketch that I came up with, and I can assure you that your PhD journey may not look like this, but may also. So this is what it looks like. You start from thinking about the factors that affect your decision making. Why do you want to do a PhD? Where do you want to do it? You start thinking about the application process, application timelines, very important. And then you go to your proposal writing, all these I've interviewed a few PhD students, and one of them that I interviewed recently, you could tell he wasn't very prepared. So I had to adapt most of the questions. And there's some answers he gave, and I was like, why? No, you don't have to say this. You could have said it better. You could have said it differently. So as part of our network, we want to ensure that you put your best foot forward. So these kinds of supports that we give, and if you notice, we don't just end at the PhD. We also look at post-PhD opportunities, because most of us on the panel today have finished our PhDs, and there are also opportunities after this that we want to ensure you are building towards, and it is targeted for you. But what do you expect? What should you expect from today's session? Essentially, a few takeaways that I want you to start mulling over and that you would hear from our panelists is this the right time for you to do a PhD? And actually, is a PhD the right thing for you? Because you could have other options, and we'll discuss this as we go in depth. We'd also want to talk about evaluating the appropriateness of the program, certain decision factors that would influence your opportunity, more like funding. How can you spot these funded opportunities? So, or preparing your proposal. Now, I would like you to take notes. You could, pen, paper. I'm old school, so pen came to mind first. But you could take notes. Put questions in the chat. Any question we don't get to today, we will post it on LinkedIn. Responses on LinkedIn and on Twitter, so you can follow the conversation on these platforms, and also how to clarify your research idea, because the first port of call before you proceed, when we go back to this, is your research idea. Before you even go to interview stage, if your research idea is not clear enough, it wouldn't work. And you would also see from the PDF that we've collated for you, one thing, narrow down. Whatever your research idea is, please narrow it down. So we expect all these, why the United Kingdom? And I will ask our panelists, why did you decide to come to the United Kingdom? And I can assure you, you will hear very honest responses. How to approach potential supervisors. You might find somebody today on the panel that is doing something very related to what you are doing. So from here, we will go right into the panel talk. Please do put questions in the chat. Do follow along. Do ensure that we keep this conversation, this network going. Thank you for listening. And I would just go straight to introducing our panelists. And with me today on the panel is Dr. Yinka Adewale, who is, I would just bring up my notes shortly. Yes, so Dr. Yinka Adewale is the Deputy Director of Studies in the Department of Leadership, Organization and Behavior at Henley Business School. He's also an associate professor of leadership ethics and entrepreneurship. Now, it's interesting about this network because I got to meet him and know him from kind of these network connections, and we've been in contact since. And I'm also a board member of one of his organizations, and we have had worked on projects together. So he's also widely known for his publishing, consulting, and coaching practices. And today we'll be talking to him about his experience doing a PhD and some of the decision factors that have influenced or may have influenced his decision. We also have today with us Dr. Emmanuel Mogaji, Senior Lecturer, Advertising and Marketing Communication at the University of Greenwich. Dr. Emmanuel holds a PhD in Advertising and Marketing Communication. And I would say he is actually very good in advertising because most of the connections that we've had have been from his network, which is actually interesting. So I got to know Dr. Nenadi from him, and I also got to know Dr. Kingsley from him. And it turned out that I and Dr. Nenadi attended an event last month, and we didn't even know, but it's all about this network collaborations and how we can expand our network. So I've worked on a book chapter. I wrote a book chapter in one of his edited books. We've written a journal article together, and we're also editing a book together. We've also edited another book together as well. So these are things that we get from the network from working together. And we have Dr. Kingsley, who is a university lecturer at law, Sheffield Hallam University, an external supervisor at University of Sheffield. And his interests are intersection of law and technology. You would see that Dr. Kingsley is also very interested in politics. If you follow him on Twitter, you would see that. And it's also a Twitter connection. I tell you, this network is amazing and it's growing. So there was a conversation that happened with Dr. Emmanuel, and I think it was about maybe February. And I saw the responses, and that was how we got connected and started talking. And here we are today. And of course, we have Dr. Nenadi, who is at the University of Bedfordshire. She's a senior fellow of the UK Higher Education Academy and the course coordinator for BA Health and Social Care. She's also the course coordinator for MSc Integrated Healthcare Practice and Strategic Leadership. And I'm saying all this for you also so that if you have interest in these areas, it's important for you to take note and, see how, you can get connected to them. So we would jump right in, and I will start with, the question: what is your motivation for doing a PhD? Most of us I know are aspiring to do a PhD, are doing a PhD, and may be finishing. What is your motivation? And I will start with Dr. Kingsley. Yes, I will start with you. What is your motivation for doing a PhD?
Thank you. Thank you for the flowery introduction. Interested in politics indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Jenny. What's my motivation for doing a PhD? I think from very early on, I was absolutely clear that education would be my only way out and only way up. I had no, athletic abilities. I played the occasional soccer, but I knew that there was no hope of getting into the Nigerian, national team. I also knew that although I could act, I wasn't going to make it to Nollywood or to Hollywood. So I ruled that out. I tried to practice law and I enjoyed practicing law, but it wasn't really the thing for me. And then I think a few years into practicing law, I discovered that I could actually teach. So I then made the decision that actually, because I can teach and because I enjoy talking to people, it might be a good route to go into a PhD so that I can get the qualifications to then get a teaching job. So that's, I would say, my reason for going into the PhD. But fundamentally, it's the fact that I knew getting educated would be the only way out. There's no connections I could call on. There's no, when you just know this is the only way, you zero your mind and you follow it. So for me, that was the underlying reason why I pursued the PhD. I'll let the others themselves.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. That is helpful actually, because I think that honesty is really helpful for us to know that, yes, this is one of the reasons. So I would also ask Dr. Adeyinka, what was your motivation for doing a PhD?
Well, thanks, Genevieve. My personal motivation was sort of from the very early age of about 18, and I had sort of seen myself in the academic space, and I knew that, for some strange reason, I didn't even know what it would take to get there, but I'd always just had this thing in mind that if I'm going to do anything with my concern in academics, I'm going to try and get to the highest level possible. And that was also, there were some sentimental reasons for that, because around my family, there was very few role models I could sort of pattern things after. So I thought I would try and do something just for the sake of those who were coming behind me, to see that you could be anything you want to be, or you could do anything you want to do. But it was very sentimental. So I always say that there are two broad reasons why you could want to do a PhD. You could actually have a very personal reasons or sentimental reasons, or very strategic reasons, which could be either because you are working on advancing yourself professionally, or you want to go into academia for academia's sake, or both, as it may be for some people. In my case, it started first as a sentimental reason, as more of a personal thing. I want to do this because I desire to do it. But as I continued along the journey, it became very evident to me that it was beyond just the sentiment. It was actually clear that for me to be what I wanted to be, I had to do a PhD. So it became then strategic in that instance. So I'll say for me, it was a blend of both. And that's why I did a PhD.
Hi, thank you. So that's really good. Strategic and personal. Now I'll ask Emmanuel, Dr. Emmanuel, was it strategic for you or personal?
I guess I must say I didn't get a first class in my first degree. I was like some people. Yes, I was not. I'm not really that brilliant. I must say it. I must acknowledge it. I'm not. But I think I'm smart. I think that's actually the difference. And growing up, while I was in uni, I did architecture as my first degree. I was thinking I'll be designing a cruise ship. I love naval architecture. That was the big thing I really wanted to do then. But things actually changed, because then I knew I could really support people. I could, show some people how to design and all those things. So it was really I think I got that passion to teach. But coming to the UK, I noticed that I could not continue my master's degree because it was very expensive as a professional course. So I had to look for alternative in terms of what masters will I want to do. So I ended up doing art and design, and that was actually changed. And for me, that was when I got to know that I have this passion to sort of explain and to communicate in a way that is quite easy to understand. And that was actually the motivation for me to say, okay, how can I take this further? So I must say, it's not really about I didn't have it at the back of my mind when I was 18 years old to be a lecturer. I just wanted to be designing things. But I think as we have it, this is where I am. And so far, I've been enjoying it. So I think for me, it's not about being brilliant. For me, it's about being smart.
And I will pick up on the first class issue, because it's come up already twice. But let's, Dr. Nanadi, what was your motivation? Strategic, personal.
Okay, hello everyone. I think mine was a bit of both. So I can resonate with those who said from a very young age they had the inclination to teach. I remember my mom actually bribing me to teach my younger brother to read. So my younger brother is in his 30s now, yes, and I can say I taught him to read in our boys' quarters, and so it was always something that I liked to do. My mom was in education from when I was born, and so that was my leaning towards being a teacher. And I went to law school in Lagos and decided I wanted to teach in Nigerian law school. So I went up to the DG and asked what I needed, and he said, well, you need to, and this is after I finished, I got 2-1, and he said, oh, you need to go and do a master's. Well, I'm from northern Nigeria, and so at that time my parents were asking, Inamiji, where is your husband? So my dreams of teaching in law school kind of fizzled away because I got married and moved to the UK. My husband was in a master's here then, and so I joined the Citizens Advice Bureau to get some experience because of my law background and all of that. And after working there for about 8 years, I was going to be made redundant. And so I was at crossroads. What do I do? And I remembered, actually, I want to teach. And at that point, I'd done a master's in international relations only because my husband had this idea of going back to Nigeria. And so I couldn't go back without a master's. So I did a master's, but I didn't want to do a master's in law. So I did international relations. And then I had to decide redundancy or what next. And so I really realized that was an opportunity for me to go back and do what I wanted to actually do, which is teach. I've missed law school. I've not practiced for 10 years, but it's still an opportunity. So mine was very pragmatic. And this is something I want to say, watch out for signs. I'm a religious person, so I'm very inclined to watch out for the times. And at that time, it just happened to be that my local university, Bedfordshire, advertised a studentship. So it wasn't free, Emmanuel will tell you, we were together, but I just had to write a proposal based on an idea. So I didn't have to think of a proposal. I didn't have to think of a topic because I didn't know anything. My background was in law, worked in citizens advice, done a master's in international relations. I was all over the place. I had no trajectory. So this studentship was advertised and I applied, I got the interview and I got in, and that literally was how I ended up doing a PhD.
Oh, so there's personal, strategic, pragmatic, and then there's also the divine, if I could say that, like providence that happened, which is really interesting. No, thank you for that. So having these different ideas really help. And you mentioned something about being a studentship, which will lead us nicely into funding. So a few people that did their PhD were self-funded, some were funded. What would you advise? I'll start with you, Dr. Yinka. How do we spot funded opportunities? Should we fund it ourselves, or should we go with the studentship like Dr. Nanadi?
Thanks, Genevieve. I mean, this is my personal sentiment. Please don't pay for your PhD yourself. Please don't. I'll say it again like an African man. Please don't. The reason why I say that is because it's such a huge financial commitment. And it's not an easy one as well. And it's and also because I know there is money out there for you. It may not come the first time, may not come the second time, but there's money out there. So why do you want to spend your own money to invest in a very financially intense, except you have the money? If you have the money, please go for it. But it's a huge investment. It's a huge commitment. I'll tell you for a fact. It's going to cost you almost about £100,000 to do a PhD at the end of the day. If you do the math and add your living costs and living expenses to it, it's going to be about £100,000. So if you have £100,000 that is lying, sitting in your bank account doing nothing, go for it. But I would say this: there is plenty of opportunities and plenty of funded opportunities out there. At best, you could go for part-funded opportunities, but most importantly, don't try to go at it 100% solo. There is, and in terms of where you can find opportunities, or loads of places where you can find opportunities, I think the most popular central repository is jobs.ac.uk. That's the most popular sort of repository. There's also Find a PhD. Find a PhD, I think findaphd.com or so. So you have these sort of repositories that you can use your specific subject expertise to narrow down, and to tell you universities both in the UK and outside of the UK where you can find where you can do your PhDs. I know this is purely a PhD in the UK sort of exploratory webinar, but if you, I guess we'll get to talk about why the UK, but I know that in some other European countries, there might be some perks and incentives for doing a PhD. Some Scandinavian countries have tuition-free studies, and I know quite a few people sort of leverage that as well. But generally, those two sort of websites are very well known as places where my university, most universities in the UK, will always drop studentship opportunities there. If you have a specific, we could put a website in the chat. If you have a specific field of interest, or if you have, and this is me pivoting a little bit into the whole idea of some of the decision-making framework here. I know a few people who have done a PhD because the supervisor, that is the sort of the top known name in the field, they met somewhere, and they had, the supervisor was interested in their line of thinking, and the supervisor found the funding for them internally from the school's purse. So those ones are not, I'm applying for a studentship. It's more or less like, I have a research pot. I've won a research fund, a huge research grant somewhere, and I'm going to use a part of that to sponsor a PhD student. So you can see there are quite different models to this sort of financing element of it. You could go for the general competitive options of looking for studentships, find a PhD or jobs.ac.uk, applying directly from those places, and to take you to the university's portal, where you can then, apply with a very good proposal, and they will decide. In my university, for instance, I know the rule of thumb is that in a year, we tend to give out 6 studentships in my department. That's the Department of Leadership, Organizations and Behavior, maximum of 6. We don't always give out 6 because we're very particular about quality. So at times we give out 3, at times we give out 2, sometimes we give out 1, sometimes we've given out 5. And I've been in very rare panels where we've given out all 6. So my department will give out 6 studentships in a year. It could be that you find a supervisor who maybe from your master's days, they're now doing some big project, and they would be happy to use some of the big funding from that project to sponsor you as a PhD under that same project's umbrella to advance sort of the knowledge scope of it. That one means it's not competitive. It's just that there's a budget allocated for you from a huge research pot, and you go in and you continue your PhD. Or you could have a part-funded option. For the part-funded option, you will tend to get those directly from the university's websites that will tell you that if you come in, this is how much the university will be responsible for, and this is how much you'll be responsible. But please, by all means, stay away from paying for it yourself.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned a few points which we'll pick up, the studentship, talking to your supervisor, following up on part-funded ones. But let me hear from Dr. Emmanuel. Did you pay for your PhD yourself?
Yes, I did. And that's something we need to recognize. Like, yes, You've all got your personal experiences, your personal sentiment. But I guess sometimes we really need to recognize the realities of things. Like I said, I never had a first class. So you can imagine some doors are automatically shut. So what would you tell me to do? So again, that's something we need to recognize. So I don't mind if I have that funding. Come on, even if I get funding, why wouldn't I take it? So, but I think I understand that point that if you have that money, if you have 100,000 lying around, don't even do PhD. You know what? Go and invest it in something else. Yes, but I think the point I'm trying to bring out here is if you are prospective, yes, please put yourself in that position that you will get one out of the six that is being required. And that is why we're having this conversation to see what can you really do to position yourself. It's getting competitive out there. So please don't get a second class. At least that is always an edge. If you are trying, that's an indication, work hard. Yes, we need to recognize there could be some problem, but the point is, if you have these opportunities, if you have prepared yourself in terms of your degree, in terms of your connection, because most of this funding, they can actually come from your master's supervisor saying, I've got this money. It could be from a friend sharing something. It could be from you being on WhatsApp or on Instagram or on LinkedIn at a particular time when somebody is sharing that thing. So I think it's about you putting yourself out there. But before you put yourself out there, you need to also be sure that you've got what it takes. Many people apply for funding, but we need to recognize it's competitive. And what would you do to get an edge over it, to get an edge about from every other person that is competing for it? So I must say, I paid for my own PhD. I don't have any regret about it, but perhaps I could have got somebody to give me that money free. But again, there's always going to be this the side effect or the in terms of the control, for example, that is something that I had to benefit from. Because I had for friends that yes, they've got this funding and often they're quite limited to what the money is dictating. But in my case, you know what? I hold nobody any allegiance. I pay for myself. I do my things for myself. I hold nobody any explanation. But I think the point here is it depends on who you are. I know this journey was going to be very difficult, but that is who I am. Like, come on, I don't really give up. I know I have to struggle. So even when everybody is doing two, I have to do five because I know I'm on a different pathway. But I must reiterate what Dr. Denka is saying. If you have what is got, if you have the brain, if you have the connection, if you have the problem that is worth investing money on, please don't go and use your money to pay for it. Remember, you must have those things for them to say they want to give you money. They won't give you money to anybody. So you must make sure you have those things that will make you stand out from the 6 or the 7 that are applying for that studentship. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think we've come back to this first class again. So I'd want us to pick up, yes, we've circled, and not just the first class, but also the 2, 1, and all that. I think we should explore that a bit. And I know a few of us have sat on panels, you know, is that really a deal breaker?
Let me pick up on that a bit. It isn't. It isn't. I think what you see, a BSc or a BA or whatever it is you may have had as your first degree comes with whatever it comes with. You may have had a 2-1, you may have had a 2-2, you may have even you might have had a third class. If you're getting into a decent master's program, it's an opportunity for redemption. And if you're getting into a decent master's program, I would say this: try and do 2 things. Try and make a distinction overall, or at best, try to make a merit. But on top of that, please, by all means, choose the dissertation option. Don't go for a project. Do a dissertation, and if need be, by every means possible, get a first class in that project. What you would have done is that you will have redeemed whatever flaws your BSc had, because a good master's program, a good master's degree here in the UK, with a good sort of outcome and a very good well-written dissertation that scores very high. A merit or a 2-1 dissertation is also great. Although the challenge may be that for some studentships, not all of them, for some studentships, the criteria for getting in can be quite steep. And they will say, we want you to have a first class or a distinction, not a first class undergrad, a distinction in your master's degree program, but we also want you to have a distinction in your dissertation. Some have those two very specific clauses in there. And the reason is because it just sort of cuts away having thousands of people applying to maybe leaving it to like 50 applications, which then is easier to manage. But not every school does that. Some schools are very open to a merit program, a merit from a master's program, and a merit from your dissertation, because it just demonstrates that you are able to do research. But then what then will be the deal breaker is your ability to put in a very quality research proposal. So I hear what Dr. Emmanuel is saying, but I just also want to echo that so that if there's anyone on this call, don't disqualify yourself. As you can see from his own story, he keeps saying, I didn't have a first class. I had a first class, but I don't think it was my first class that got me through the door. What I had from University of Lagos as the best graduating student in my faculty stayed in Lagos. I was only a local champion. When I came to the UK, nobody asked for my certificate to say, were you the guy who was the best graduating student, and did you get the Vice Chancellor's Award? And I got the Vice Chancellor's Award, but nobody asked me all those questions. At the point when I was applying for my PhD, it came down to two things. What did you have at your master's level? And what proposal, what's the quality of the proposal you're putting forward, and how investable it is. Let me put one final footnote. This is a very strange concept, but see your PhD as a startup enterprise. You don't want to do business, but your PhD is actually a startup enterprise. Why should anyone put money in your enterprise? What will you give to them? I will say this, this is where we spill the beans, right? One of the things that we do now in our PhD panels is that if we don't see potential for publication, two things, if we don't see potential for publication, and if we don't see a clear aspiration towards becoming an academic or doing something meaningful with that PhD, you don't get the funding. You know why? Because the rule of thumb, or sort of the working philosophy now, is don't block the door for people who really want to do something with this PhD. So have a clear aspiration when you're walking into that PhD interview. Clear aspirations. I want to get into academia and I want to publish papers in this area. I want to do something, or I'm going to take this thing, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to use this PhD to further practice in XYZ ways. Be very clear with your aspirations, because whatever investment you get for a studentship, a PhD studentship, is often about investment in a future thing that you want to do. If you don't make that clear, nobody's going to put money. So your PhD is at best a startup. It's a pre-seed fund. No one ties you to a bond, at least as best as I know. I had a PhD from Henley Business School, University of Reading. I wasn't tied to a bond. When I finished, I was allowed to leave. It was an investment in me. But we can come back to citizenship and other conversations later. So let me just stop there.
Thank you. Well, startups, of course, as he's into entrepreneurship, we had to go there and had to use that analogy, which is very helpful. But yes, very, very, very interesting thoughts. And there's something there about the supervisor, which we would also follow up on, because I know that a few of us that did our masters here and worked with our supervisors, that opportunity helped to create doors. But please, whatever you're doing, if you're still in school, please work towards at least the first or a merit. Dr. Kingsley, I saw you were nodding at some point.
Well, maybe just to go back a little bit, I wanted to talk a little bit about that funding issue. I would completely align myself with Dr. Adewale here, but I would also agree with Emmanuel. I started my PhD by paying for it. And if I'd listened to Dr. Adewale before I started, I would not have applied, to be honest. If I'd come to this workshop before I applied for my PhD, I would have said, okay, I better go back to Nigeria and try and practice law. So the truth is, at some point, I had to say to myself, whatever it takes, I will start. And for me, the moral here is not to make that long-term decision based on my current financial situation. So at the time, I didn't have the money, but I didn't want to make that decision based on that present financial situation. So I just wanted to re-echo that fact that, not everybody will get that first class. I also did not get first class, like Emmanuel. So I had to, but Emmanuel, what? Okay. I thought you were saying something.
You look like a first class graduate. I'm surprised.
Okay.
Oh my God.
That's what I've been selling. That's what I've been selling, and the looks. But in honesty, I would say that I had to actually start off the PhD process thinking whatever it takes, I will go through it. If I'd listened to people say to me, don't follow this PhD journey if you don't have funding, I would not have been here. Probably I'll be trying to do a second master's now, or a third master's. So it's important to, like Emmanuel said, decide on your own present circumstances. Everything doesn't apply to everybody equally, I have to say. And eventually I got funding, but in my second year. So imagine if I'd not taken that decision in the first year, then I would have been left out in the cold. So it's important to sort of judge your own circumstances and make that decision based on what you can do, and understanding that it will be challenging regardless. Even if you get the funding, it will still be challenging. It's PhD isn't easy at all. So I just want to add that just from a personal experience, just to encourage someone out there who doesn't have a first class and just thinks I can't get through, just to add that little footnote there. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I like the differences in opinions. That is why this is important, so that we can make these decisions and you will do what works for you. Now, we started out and this supervisor thing is still hanging, but let's move it just slightly, because we mentioned proposal, and I'll go to Dr. Nenadi, because you had to write a proposal in something that is slightly different from what you studied. How did you go about that, and what were the things you had to make sure, because of course you got the studentship, yay, you're here, but what did you have to do in particular to ensure that, look, my proposal has to stand out, it has to just be top notch? What did you do?
Okay, I'll kind of go back a bit, segue back to our point of funding, because I don't want to give the wrong impression. So I got a studentship, but it was not funded. So I was self-funded 100% from beginning to the end. And again, I would say if I had listened to Dr. Yinka, I would not have gone for it. I would have said, absolutely, this is not my path. I'm not supposed to do this. And this is just me being honest and vulnerable, because sometimes not everybody will be accepted for funding. And I didn't really look for funding. So I'm weary of disagreeing with Dr. Yinka, because, man of God.
Feel free to disagree, please, by all means. Feel absolutely free to disagree. It's a discourse, by all means.
It's for me, I don't feel it was in any way a waste. I didn't look for funding. I went to it was advertised as studentship. I went to the interview. I wrote the proposal. I'll come back to the proposal. I went to the interview knowing I was going to have to pay for it. And it was a decision I made for myself, and not one I have regretted even one day. So for those of you who might be thinking, I can't be bothered with the hassle, or I really don't mind paying. There are people who, I didn't have the money. It was really hard. Emmanuel will tell you how we dreaded the next funding deadline and stuff, but we made it through, and it was an investment that has paid off. So if you're thinking about it and you don't, and for me, time was of the essence. I was going to be either made redundant or go or look for something else. I also had to make a decision on whether or not to get a research visa, based on my PhD, or go into a work one. So several issues at that time were at play. And so it worked for me. And so the proposal was very, very interesting, because it was a studentship. And so the professor had exactly a clear direction of what she wanted to do. She wanted to carry on research from her own existing research around, I'm not going to say what it is, I don't want to bore you, but she was just carrying on her own research philosophy. And so it was a lot around reading about my supervisor, reading around the professor, reading her own work, trying to understand where she was coming from, what gaps she's seeing, reading around those who she had worked with. So it took a lot of just reading, and almost seemed like dead time, because it was an investment, not rushing into it, just reading around, trying to see what exactly makes this woman excited, what exactly makes her work stand out. And so I wrote the proposal, but I will never forget that I wrote the proposal without a single reference in text. Not a single reference in text. And then she said to me, I can only excuse you because I can see that you're a law graduate. So, because obviously, you know, we reference differently as if, you know, law students, not a single, I had a reference list, but not a single in text. So basically it wasn't great. It wasn't fantastic. But going back to what Dr. Yinka said, your proposal is only the starting point. If you're lucky enough to get an interview, I used the interview to redeem myself. And it was an easy yes from all three members of the panel. It was hard, but it was an easy yes. So my proposal wasn't great. Not a single in-text citation. As a lecturer, I shudder to think of it. I had my big reference list because of all the reading I'd done, but I didn't reference properly. I had footnotes, not one single in-text citation. So again, this is me saying, don't think it has to be perfect. Don't think it has to be a particular standard. You do your best, but ultimately you get to sell yourself. And that's all I have to say. Yeah.
Absolutely, you get to sell yourself. I like the redemption at the interview. That's why in the introduction, when I said the student that said something during the interview, was like, oh my God, no, you know, but we just had to find a way. I see, Manuel, you have your hand up. Did you want to pick up?
Yes, I just really wanted to really understand, when we talk about self-funding, you need to recognize where you're coming from. Are you a prospective student in Nigeria trying to come to the UK and fund yourself? That will be very, very difficult. Are you already in the UK? You have your family, you have your connection, you have people that you can borrow money from. That is easier. So I think when we're talking about self-funding, even people to come and self-fund for masters 1 year, it's hard work. Talk less of you coming to study for 3 years. So I think that's something we need to recognize. Where are you when we're talking about this self-funding? I was in the UK. I was working already when I was self-funding myself. So I didn't self-fund well, like, oh, finish now, go and start a PhD. So I think I was able to, I knew what I wanted to do, prepare my house, put my house in order, saying, you know what, guys, for the next 3 years, we are going to be on a long journey. But it's a different thing coming from Nigeria, which I think, again, 100%, don't bring that £100,000. Don't bring it to the UK just to come and give it to University of Reading, please.
Bring it to Hertfordshire, yeah. So
don't give it to any university.
No, you're muted now, but no, that is actually the distinction.
I said use it to get a proper visa whereby you can actually come in and do a proper startup. When
Absolutely.
you have that 100,000, UK will be saying welcome, not Reading.
No, that distinction is very, very helpful indeed, because I do know that most students that are coming from Nigeria have been sold this false hope that don't worry, just come, you will work. It can be really hard. It can be very tasking on your mental health also, having to think about that. So that is a distinction to make. That, not to say it's not possible, but just for you to be aware of these challenges that you might face with about this. Okay, so we do have quite some questions. I will go back to one that Dr. Kingsley had mentioned, because you started your PhD and then you got funding. So somebody has a question. What tips can you give for someone who has started with personal funds and hopes to secure funding later? What did you do? What tips?
I mean, what I would say is the same thing that Adenka has said, is whether or not you've started self-funded, you still have to continue that process of looking for funding. So I continued looking for funding, basically. I didn't give up. I kept on looking. And I would say, and probably this is my faith now, but I would say it came in at the perfect time, because I just finished my first year and I was thinking to myself, oh goodness, am I going to do this all over again? for another year. And then funding came through. So it's just being proactive, looking out for those opportunities and actually having those discussions with colleagues, because that's very important. My funding was not from the university. So it wasn't, one of those opportunities you get by speaking to your supervisor. I had it from Nigeria, but it took knowing people who knew where the opportunities were and being, willing to travel for an interview, a short notice, just willing to do whatever, because you know how expensive it is. So I guess the advice I would give is, even if you started self-funded, you still need to be on the lookout, just as though you had not started the PhD. You have to be as determined as you were before you got the PhD itself. And I think, Adinka has said this already, there's funding, you just need to know where to look. And the advantage of applying from within is you now know a bit more. You can talk to people, you can talk to colleagues, you can talk to academics, you can ask them, how do I go about this or that? I think for me, I don't know how to say this, but proven myself, because from my first year, I started teaching, I started volunteering for all sorts of stuff in the department. I showed them that I was a safe pair of hands. And I think just putting yourself out there shows people that, okay, this guy might deserve that chance. So that's what I would say in terms of advice. Just be resolute, be determined to find it. And, if you look, you'll find it. It's not easy, but, it can be out there. So
thank you. I agree with putting yourself out there, because that really helped me even in getting teaching appointments when I was still doing my MA. My teachers would be teaching, my hand is up. They say jump. I'm like, how far? Like, look, I'm here. What do you want? I would do everything. So they felt they could trust me. They felt they could depend on me. I will read all the articles and add some to the reading list. So I just showed them that, look, I could do it. And that way they could trust me. They gave me teaching opportunities, even when I was still like 2 months into my master's. It was amazing, because I made up my mind that this master's, anyway. So it's all about taking these opportunities, putting yourself out there. And I keep telling my students, do that, show, let people see this. And I see your hand up. I want us to pivot slightly into the research, your research now, but let's take Dr. Nenadi and then we'll go into research, narrowing it down. I see there's also a question about that. Yes, Dr. Nenadi.
Thank you very much. Just picking up on the point that you've made about putting yourself out there, and just drawing back to your introduction of Dr. Emmanuel Mogaji and how much it seems that he has achieved. We started our PhDs the very same day, 1st of October, was it? 2012. And sometimes when my husband wants to insult me, he says to me, look at your mates, because he has done so much and he hasn't been able to do so much out of the blues. It literally started from when we were PhD students. We went everywhere. Whatever opportunity came, we took it. We, anything at all that required participation. We went and even gave ourselves to our personal, what they call personal
personal tutors.
Yeah, those things. We donated ourselves. We did everything, every opportunity, every little teaching opportunity, anything at all that came up. We were there. Academic conferences. I remember I fell pregnant. So we were doing a little piece of research with Emmanuel. He was going to the conferences to present our work, because I couldn't go because I just had a baby. We even organized a conference, just me and him, just because we wanted to start our journey in this higher education academy, and one of the requirements we couldn't quite meet as we were. So I would say any opportunity that comes your way, and we were both working, so you're never too busy to volunteer, to take up opportunities, to put yourself out there, because that is what stands you out in the group of however many. And we weren't the only ones. We weren't the only ones who started. We had many just like us, but I can say our trajectory, our journey has been phenomenal to watch, only because of that ethic that we imbibed during the course of our research.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Like, no, that is very, very, very interesting and helpful to note. There are some questions in the chat. The recording will be made available, yes, so you could go back to it. So now let's go to research proposal. There's a question from Pepper. Pepper wants to know about the proposals. We'll just take proposals in general and the process of narrowing it down. One thing my supervisor kept saying, you can't change the world, narrow it down. So how do we, what is the process of narrowing it down? Is there a particular structure or story that you can share that would help people to narrow their proposal down? There are a few questions about proposals, so we'll just stay on proposals for a bit. Dr. Yinka, do you want to pick that up?
That's a great question. I think you will find that for most part, a lot of people here may have done their PhD proposals off the back of their master's dissertation, so they're not newbies to the literature. And because they're not necessarily newbies to the literature, they are able to at least pick out where the pockets of gaps are in knowledge, and then they're able to pitch a PhD proposal that captures the knowledge gap. That said, I know there are some instances where you want to do a PhD that is totally different from what you did at your master's level. But let's not forget that what would have given you an advantage is that you have transferable skills, because the process of actually engaging in a research at the master's level, which is level 7 here in the UK, already puts you in a stead where you have some very good knowledge of how to whiz through the literature and to come up with a very solid proposal. That's second. The third thing is that, the funny thing, Pepper, about that question is that even at certain stages, there is no such thing as a perfect proposal. So let's be very clear about that. In as much as we know that competition is quite high, and putting in your best foot forward with a very, very solid proposal gives you a good chance of getting funded and being noticed, there is still no such thing as a perfect proposal. And that's where possibly getting some help with getting some academics or people who are experienced in the area to pre-read your work, your proposal before sending it, even though they may not be experts in the field. But at least, I mean, if you send me a proposal and I read it, I will tell you straight off the bat, that's too broad. Even for not being a professional in the field, I'll be able to test broadness. And of course, another thing is it's too narrow. You can't do a PhD in this. It's just way, way, way too narrow. And so we'll be able to pick up on some of those things. But typically, Emmanuel's PhD came up from his professional experience, which is often a great place to start as well. You've worked before, you had some past experiences, you bring that body of experience, you bring it into the literature and try to pitch it within an existing body of work, or you've done some work in this at the master's level, or even at the undergrad level, and you have some good sort of knowledge on how to sort of write a very good proposal, and all that then sort of helps you narrow things down. If this were not to happen at all, and I would be surprised if you were in a situation where you're not in any of these categories I've just mentioned, it's still possible. Maybe you didn't do a very, very solid dissertation at the master's level. All it will take is read.
And also the network is here to help. So you will find resources on the network. We would have masterclasses and proposal writing. So these are things that you would expect. But there's also another question that feeds off with this. What if I don't have a master's degree? This is from Liz. Do you think I could go for a PhD without a master's degree? So how does that work? What are your thoughts? I see Emmanuel is nodding and smiling. Emmanuel. Okay, Dr. Ika, yes.
Let Emmanuel go first.
Okay.
I'll tag along.
Yeah, yes, I would say anything is possible. It is very, very possible. I know a friend, like, yes, she got studentship from BSc. Like, come on, it's possible. So please don't undermine yourself. It's very, very possible. But I think it depends on what you bring to the table. Why will I invest, again, Dr. Dinka, why will I invest my money on your startup if I know you are just a fluke? If you know what I mean, do you really have something that I'm seeing in you that if I give you this 1 year off, you will really deliver? So I think the point is, it's possible. Don't discourage yourself, but make sure you have something to bring to the table. Make sure you have something that people will like, wow, let's do it now. Now, don't go and waste your time in masters. Come on, let's do it. So I think it's possible. Don't discourage yourself. Yes.
Let me just piggyback off that. Like Dr. Emmanuel said, it is possible, but it's very difficult. Let's not mince words with it. Why? Also because it can be field dependent. I've seen more instances, and albeit black swan events, of people going from BSc straight to PhD in only certain fields like engineering, certain fields like some type of finance related courses. Um, some of those ones could be a bit more sort of friendly towards a BSc straight to a PhD pivot, not much so in the realms of management, for instance. I haven't seen any. I'm not saying they don't exist. I personally haven't met any who went from BSc straight into a PhD. And I think it also has a lot to do with where you're getting your BSc from, because like Emmanuel says, you heard him say, someone says, let's do this. That means that you're already within a system where your value has been appreciated, and you have a valuation on your company. If I was to use that, you have a valuation on your company, you have a valuation on your research, the potential of your research, and what that research is going to bring to the table. So what I would say to Liz is that oftentimes when people look at your BSc qualification, or in those rare instances where you're going to be sort of fast-tracked into a PhD in arts and humanities, it's also possible. What tends to happen is that your BSc dissertation was so powerful, and that they just see that there is a need for you to just take this on a deeper, broader scale, for example, of a study, and they just give you the funding and they say, come on, go for it. But you see that it tends to happen more from this sort of where you already exist in a system, and where you have been valued, and what you're doing, you're already in the safe hands of the people who will still recommend the funding for you. It's very, very rare and difficult for that to happen if you are bringing in your BSc from external universities. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it is extremely rare if you're bringing from an external university and just wanting someone to say you do a PhD. Oftentimes it will be about what sort of pedigree do you have, and to demonstrate that you can survive a PhD. And it has to be something ridiculously strong for anybody to give you a seat at the table to even listen to that. But it's possible, but it's very difficult. But I would advise, please, by all means, consider applying for a master's program if needed, to sort of give you that landing in a system where you can then get access to the opportunities to do a PhD. But it is very possible.
Right. Dr. Nana, do you want to add to that?
So I know, for example, at my university, we have professional doctorates. So they call them prof docs, and this is usually from people who are in practice or in industry, who have a lot of experience in industry. So the requirement for a master's is sort of replaced by the experience that you bring. So that is another avenue. And I know that post-92 universities, particularly, and this is a disclaimer, universities who are not that high up in the ranks are a bit more flexible, in the sense that if you are bringing something that could put them on a good stead, so if you're bringing something that they recognize that may add value to them, they may be more willing to take that risk. But consider professional doctorate if you have practice experience, and not the traditional PhD route. So it's a doctorate, but it's just a prof doc and not a PhD route.
Yes, so we'll expand on that a bit more, because I know there is the research by publication, and then the professional, and then there's the DBA. So which would you say that? I think it's also a business thing. So Dr. Yinka and Emmanuel might want to jump in with the DBA. What's the difference with a PhD and a DBA?
I would like to, let me throw this back to Dr. Kingsley. Yes, is the one that I think, let me hear his thoughts. Yes. I think Dr. Denka could even give a better answer around that debate, but let me hear Dr. Kingsley's thoughts, please, if you don't mind.
Why are you throwing Kingsley under the bus? But to go, go for it.
Thank you. Manuel, why are you throwing me under the bus? Well, I don't know that there's any difference. I mean, a friend of mine just completed a DBA, and is a doctorate, isn't it? So it's a doctorate in business admin. So it's a doctorate degree. I mean, my PhD is a PhD in law, but there are people who get a doctorate in law. It's called a Doctor of Laws. So they're different. Regardless, I think it's a doctorate. I think it serves the purpose if you want to use it to academia. Obviously, it depends on what your broader career aspirations are and what you want to use the degree for. But as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, they're the same. So maybe Dr. Denka can speak a bit more about the.
Yeah, so thanks, Kingsley and Dr. Emmanuel for that. There are remarkable differences between both, even though the pathway tends to be similar. So if you're doing a DBA, your contribution has to be to practice. So you're doing a doctorate program that spots a gap in theory that contributes or feed into a practice gap. And at the end of whatever you do with your DBA, your contribution has to be primarily in twofold. You could have a contribution to theory, but you must be able to demonstrate contribution to practice. And that's why the DBA is usually more, you get only those who have high-level senior executive qualifications or experience. And that's what Dr. Nenandi was trying to say. You need to be very clear on what this. So I was having a conversation with someone 2 weeks ago who had told me they wanted to do a PhD, and they also have an admission for an MBA. And I said, why do you want to do a PhD? And then they went on this whole, I want to get this doctorate thing. And I'm like, where do you see yourself in the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years? They said, well, I still want to go back into practice. I want to be this, world-renowned consultant. You could do a PhD and still become a world-renowned consultant. But I said, what do you want your PhD to do for you? They mentioned wanting to do something that will help them improve their practice. Well, you could also get that from a PhD, but do you know what a DBA is? And they were like, nope, I don't know what a DBA is. And I'm like, what you really want is a DBA, not a PhD, because you want something that gives you contribution to practice. A PhD fundamentally, as we all know on this call, is that your contribution is primarily to theory. So contribution to theory versus contribution to practice is the demarcation between a PhD and a DBA, at least in the management landscape. So what happens with a DBA is that most DBA programs, at least from my point of view, knowing fully well how we run it in the business school, are part-time. And that's because you are still expected to be working whilst you're doing this program. And it tends to be about 5 years or so, about 5-year program. And it's done in such a way that it's cascaded for you, such that in your first year, you need to do like a couple of modules, including research methods, qualitative, quantitative, introduction to writing literature reviews, the usual sort of body of things that will equip you, tool you up for the next phase of the journey. Your second year is usually that level where you do a pilot. So you're expected to do a pilot. If your program, if your research agenda, DBA is doctorate in business administration, if your project or your chosen topic will not survive the test of what it would take for you to get a DBA, you get awarded something else at that stage. You are asked to either get an MSc or an MPhil, depending on whatever it is. But if you run the pilot successfully, then from year 3 and above, you get into the bigger project. That's the DBA, or the one Dr. Nenandi called practicing doctors. I can't remember what she called it, but that type of level. So we have that from year 3 to year 4, 5, and possibly year 6 in some instances. You're doing the full-blown study. But a PhD is contribution to theory, whilst the DBA is contribution to practice. Simple, clear, in that sense, dichotomy.
Yeah. And this is why we have these conversations, for us to be clear and for us to learn, for us to know, for us to improve knowledge. And I see there's some more questions. We have about 20 odd minutes more. Full-time PhD, 3 to 4 years. Some people have done it in 3, part-time 6 to 8 years. There are 2 questions about supervisors. If you are approached by someone, how would you like to be approached for supervision? Let me put it that way, so we can hear, that, because there's some things you hear from people and you're like, please don't do this. Never you do this again. Like, I beseech you by the mercies of whatever, please don't do this. So I would, how would you like to be approached? I think that might be a better way to start. So Emmanuel, I see your cursor is lighting up. Do you want to?
Oh, yeah, man. I how would I want to? I think the first thing is you want to show interest in my work. You want to make me feel that, wow, you've appreciated my work. It's not easy to write. Come on. I've written all these papers. I am just coming to say, hey, I want to do research. Peggy, yes. You want to show some like courtesy. This is me. I'm sure you understand what I mean. Yes, again, they will tell you I didn't get this doctorate by playing. You see? So even the way you approach is very important. You want to show that you've done your research to know that this person is it's available, it's worthwhile. And also you want to demonstrate that, okay, firstly is the way you write email, making it professional. You want to show that you have something that I can build on, something that I will say, okay, this is interesting. So that I don't see all the point. Number one, proper email. Number two, make sure you've read my work. Sort of mention my work in your email. Let me know that you are not just coming out of the blue to contact me, and also make me feel special that you are not just sending same email to everybody. You can even mention the fact that, you know what, I was actually in Unilag. I was, as in, let's have some connection. So I don't see that this is just a blank email, a generic email that you're sending to everybody.
Emmanuel, that was very personal, but yes, thank you. Dr.
You
Kingsley.
said personal.
I did, yes. No.
Don't worry, I will write this on LinkedIn. Come on, I'm very humble.
Dr. Kingsley.
Emmanuel wants to wants to feel special. I just wanted to add that, you know, another way, if you are in the UK already, would be to try and attend events. This was helpful for me because, you know, sometimes the conferences are organized within the department, or workshops or seminars or whatever, but just having that one-on-one interaction with the potential supervisor before you start to talk about the PhD might be helpful. So in my case, that's what I did. I had to attend several departmental events where I spoke with my potential supervisor, you know, and had some kind of relationship with him first. And then when I sent over, in fact, we worked together on the proposal before it was officially submitted. That's because I'd already built a relationship. So if you're already in the UK, make it a point to try and attend events where your potential supervisors are probably speaking at or contributing to. That's a way to, I think, to build that network first. And then that maybe that's what Emmanuel means by respect, and just showing them that they're special. So that's, you know, the contribution I would make.
It's almost like professional stalking in a way, yeah. And I think Dr. Nanadi also mentioned reading their work and referencing their work. Did you want to add a bit more to that?
Yeah, so I think your question is personally,
Yeah.
so if I'm being approached to supervise, what I would like to see is a clear why. You know, a clear why, you know, why do you want to do this? And it has to be honest. So it doesn't have to be what I want to hear. So if you literally want to come in and do a PhD because you want to, I'm not Yoruba, so I can say JAPA, you know, that see on Twitter, you know, a clear why is what I would need to know. Why do you want to do a PhD? Why do you want me to supervise you? What are your expectations? And I think that honesty is what I would like to see if I'm being approached for supervision. So for everyone who's potentially thinking of writing a proposal, just be, you know, people don't really want to read, you know, anything flowery, or, you know, there might be people like Emmanuel who want to see all that, you know, hailing and all of that on the side. But beneath all of that, please make sure that there is a clear rationale, there's a clear why, and I can see that you're not going to waste my time if you know exactly why, not how. So you may not know how yet, but the why, for me, the why is really, really important.
And I also think it's important to note that supervisors are also being strategic, because some people need that also for not just their promotion, but also to add to their, you know, professional expertise. So if they look and they are like, is this person going to stress me? Is this thing going to add to nah? So you also need to think from the position of a supervisor, which is why I positioned this question this way, and that Dr. Adeyinka. if I send you a proposal for marketing, what does that say about me? I clearly haven't read your work at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nenadi said something that I think is very important to note as well. This whole idea of flowery things. I would know if what you're writing to me or sending to me is a template email. It comes out like I don't respond. I receive loads and loads of emails every month about people wanting to do PhDs. I don't respond to 95% of them. And this is just me being honest with you. I respond only to the ones coming from Nigerians or Africans at best. And even for those ones, only about 1% of them stand a chance. The others, all I do is to respond to give feedback because they are my African brothers and sisters. And I think it would be unfair for me to see something they haven't done well and not give them feedback. And I give very constructive feedback. I don't, insult or say anything that will make anyone. I mean, this is the first time you're writing me, or this is the first time we're coming in contact with each other. We may meet again on another pedestal. So I would never do anything to sort of damage you or destroy you, but I will make it very clear to you why I think what you've done is not good. So people say things like, well, I want to do my PhD in leadership organizations and behavior, leadership ethics and entrepreneurship. There is no such thing as leadership ethics and entrepreneurship as a field. That's only my title. If you read the website, it's leadership organizations and behavior. That's the field, and that's the field in my school. In Sheffield, it could be business and management. In Bedfordshire, it could be just the faculty of management. And so when you write to me and it's all this templated sort of script where you're just replacing the field with what you know about my university, and then you write on this sort of very flowery, thing on, how I'm the next best thing after sliced bread, like Dr. Nenandi said, you've missed the point. And don't try to superimpose my work on your research agenda. Your research agenda is your research agenda. Don't try to make me feel like I'm the best person to supervise you. I may not be the best person to supervise you. And be very honest with telling me what you want to research. You know what I do with those kind of people when I see simple, plain, very honest, well-written emails is that I signpost them. Oh, hi. I mean, it's not like you got it completely wrong by reaching out to me. You may have seen something about me that made you write to me in the first place, which again goes back to the point Dr. Nenandi made and Emmanuel made earlier, that the fact that you need to understand the specialization and what Genevieve said of the person you're writing to is very important. And so that when you write to them, you are not missing the mark. And if at best, if you write to me, so I have leadership in front of my name, but there's only a particular aspect of leadership I like to look into. So if you write me an email telling me you want to do something on transformational leadership in the African context, and you want to sort of review leadership styles and transformational leadership in the, I may say to you, well, it's a great topic, but I'm not the best supervisor for you. Maybe because I'm more interested in ethical leadership, because my work was fundamentally in ethics. And so if you've read the paper I wrote on Journal of Business Ethics, you will have seen that what I worked on was virtuous leadership. So when you write me, you discover that I'm not writing on transformational leadership. So you want to be very clear. So you could have written me because you thought leadership is everything and everybody, but I will then signpost you. But those ones are just simple, honest sort of, not mistakes, simple, honest things we can just signpost you on. But the one that we won't stand is where you're just, sort of writing this very templated email that you probably sent to 10 of my other colleagues, and all you just did was just to remove certain bits and add other bits to it. It has to be crafted for the individual, and that it's like your CV. When you're writing a cover letter for your CV, it has to be crafted for that job and purposely written for that job. Once you start to move things up and down the place, you may miss the mark. And try to keep it succinct as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We have 9 minutes more because we want to ensure that we respect everyone's time. Remember, this is just the first of 3-part series, so we'll have a second part next month, which we would let you know, and we'll keep it a bit more. We'll focus on maybe just 2 topics, maybe just the proposal, and there's one last question which I think we will take about tips during the interview. If you're shortlisted for a PhD interview, what kinds of questions to expect and how to respond. I think I would throw it open, but there are also links that we have put together in the Google Docs that we will post shortly on questions to expect and how well, how to respond to them. Okay. Oh, so there's some questions here. Tell us about yourself. Yes. What is your motivation? What do you want to do after your PhD? What journals are you targeting? So I will start with Dr. Kingsley. What are your last thoughts for people that are prospective, people that are already in the PhD, and people that are almost finishing? What major takeaway would you like to leave them with today?
Okay, well, thank you. I think I'll focus on those who are prospecting. I think for me, the final thing I would say is to be clear on your why, because your why is what will keep you through the PhD, because PhD is winter. And if you don't have that why, you'll quickly find that it gets very cold. So be clear from day one on why you want to do the PhD, because there will be times that you need to remind yourself that this is why I'm actually doing it and it's worth finishing. I would just say that I think it's also important to know the why when you go into the interview, because you need to be clear. Because when they ask you why do you want to do the PhD, you shouldn't be saying, "Well, I just wanted to leave the country." It's not a sufficient response. So you need to be very clear on the why, especially connecting that why with your broader career aspirations and then your research area of focus. So that's what I would say in terms of final words.
Yeah, thank you. The why is important, not just for your interviewers, but also for you. Thank you for that, Dr. Nenati.
Okay, I think my final words will be not to think you know exactly how your PhD journey will go, because it never goes as planned. And I call for a heavy dose of pragmatism, because you will need that to be ready to make pragmatic decisions, because you never know. 3 years is a long time. I started my PhD journey, and this is a bit of personal. I had infertility, so I had IVF for my son. And so never expected to fall pregnant during writing up. And it happened. So, it's just something that came at a time, the worst time in my mind that it could have happened. But that was, that happened. So just be open to the process, and linking to what Dr. Kingsley said, if you know your why, you know why you're doing it. Whatever happens in the 3 years, the ups, the downs, my supervisor, the one who wrote the studentship, she fell ill. So I had about 6 to 8 months without a director of studies. Things will happen. Just be aware that the journey may not be smooth. Now, you might be lucky, I don't know. You might have a smooth start to finish, but just be ready to go on this journey, because that is what it's going to be. It's going to be a journey. 3 years, I think that's the minimum. Could be longer, but just be ready to have yourself surprised at some time.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there, especially with supervisors. We've not talked about communicating with your supervisors, expectations about supervision. And then if you have a hostile supervisor, what do you do? So it's not just about choosing a supervisor, there's a lot more. But like I said, we'll unpack that in the next talk, in the next conversation. Dr. Emmanuel.
Thank you. I guess I will want to focus more on publications. Even at this stage, when you are still prospecting, thinking about it, where's your master's dissertation? Is it just lying on your computer in your house? Nobody is caring about it, or it's somewhere? There's ResearchGate. You want to have some demonstrable evidence to show that even when you are still prospecting, you've got something that demonstrates that you can do things. Let me actually see something you've written. And the point is, you don't need to write 7,000 words, 5,000 words, all that your blog posts, all those ideas you're having, you can quietly start curating them. Have something that at least when they are doing that search, when they see your Instagram and Twitter and everything, they can see something about you online that can show them that, well, at least he has started something. So when we give him this money, when we support him, come on, he will fly. So I think try and start working on something around that. Again, you don't need to go for 5-star, 4-star journal, but think about it. Where's your master's dissertation? Where have you kept it? Who is reading it? Is it out there for people to see? So don't just hide this your light and thinking somebody will come and open it and see you there. Put yourself out there. Let them know that, yes, you've got something to offer. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a lot about putting yourself out there today, which really helpful. And just before I ask Dr. Yinka, Charles just mentioned something which I thought to pick up on. And Charles said, if you don't have a passion for publication, what happens? So I just wanted to highlight that your PhD, you could have a PhD in about research, and then you could also do learning and teaching. So even in academia, you see people with a PhD that pivots into learning and teaching and start to write in that regard, or don't even write at all, but just focus on the teaching pedagogy and all that. So, Dr. Adeyinka, final thoughts.
Thanks, Genevieve, for that. I'm very tempted to quickly just answer. I think it's Femshad's point, and I kind of put my quick response in there. If you don't have any passion about publishing and writing articles, definitely academia is not for you. But when you're getting funded from most universities, what they see it as is an investment in an academic pipeline. And what it means is that they see that money going into someone who wants to become an academic. But if you choose to do a PhD because it will further your career, all well and good. Now that the economy is a bit tighter, previously I've seen cases where people got funding and the university didn't really care about the aspirations. But nowadays, because of the tightness of funding and because the universities see the PhD as a strategic pipeline and build, there's a lot more emphasis on where do you really see yourself. And in fact, most universities will say to you, where do you see yourself publishing, as a part of the research question, as a part of the interview question, beg your pardon, because they want to be sure that you have your mind in the right place. But you can actually do a PhD to become an expert in an area because you want to use it to further your professional sort of aspirations. But if you want funding, it may be difficult telling them that you want to do, except you do something that is so relevant to practice that it also put the university on the map. So there are many sort of tricks and trades to the whole thing, but that's not for today. My final words, thanks, Genevieve, and thanks to the amazing panelists for the great insights shared. My final words is don't go on a PhD if you haven't counted your cost. And I'm going to say this from the mindset of those who are coming in from Nigeria. If you have a family, you need to bear all of these things in mind. Settling down with a new family, moving your entire family down from Nigeria or from Ghana or from Kenya or from wherever you are from, over to the UK to come and settle down to do a PhD is a huge, huge, huge obligation. Count your costs. And that's why we spoke about making sure that maybe you get some funding, because that takes away a lot of pressure from you and your family. Because if you have to pay for rent and look after 2 or 1, 2, 3 children and still look after a family, it's a very, very huge ask. So please count your cost. Dr. Kingsley's point is also very important. Please, by all means, know your why. Know your why, know your why, know your why. And third thing I'm going to say to you is that in making your decision, you can make your decision on 3 bases. One, you want a particular university brand name affiliated with your qualifications. And that means you're going after top brands because that's what you want to do a PhD in Oxford or Cambridge, and you can go ahead and narrow yourself down to opportunities from those spaces, whether it's funded or otherwise. You can always find out when you get there. You could do it because you're looking for a particular person whom you think is an expert in the field, and mentioning their name either in academia or in industry opens doors for you. I know a few people who did that in engineering and in IT and in AI. If they mention those names in Google, Microsoft, the doors open for them. Like, are you a student of this person? Or there's like me saying I'm a student of Clayton Christensen. Like, if I say to you I was a student of Clayton Christensen, doors are open to me everywhere I go in Silicon Valley, because Clayton Christensen was an authority in his field. And so exactly, flying on the shoulder, on the giant shoulder. But the third element is follow the money. Wherever the door opens and you get funding, go for it. But by all means, don't just do a PhD because you want to japa, as we say. Be strategic about it. Japa, by all means, I won't say because I'm sitting here, please don't leave where you may want to relocate, and it's okay to relocate, but please do it for very clear reasons and that you put yourself in a better stead for the future. And that's all I'll say. Thanks, Genevieve, for having me.
Thank you very much for those points. Thank you, everyone. And we've talked quite a bit today: the personal reasons, the strategic reasons, the pragmatic reasons. Do stay with us, follow us. The links for the social media are here. Please do follow us, follow the African Scholars PhD Network. It's this initiative where we come together, where we stand on the shoulder of giants, because ideally for us, we want to ensure that the mistakes we made, the things that we've seen, people don't get to make the same mistakes, that we provide some guidance through conversations, community support, collaborations, so it's I think I have really enjoyed today's session. So please do follow us on social media. Send us an email. Our email is there. I see someone has a question about your proposal. Just send us an email and we'll connect you. That's what we do here. We'll connect you to people that would help. And yes, of course, I said Twitter. When I said it in the introduction, people were laughing. Dr. Gift has already dropped his Twitter handle. So please do follow them on LinkedIn. Mary, please could you drop the email again? Please follow them on LinkedIn and Twitter. Please also drop your Twitter handles as well. You can also find me on Twitter if you'd wish. But no, thank you so much today. Thank you to all the panelists, Dr. Adewale for your time today, Dr. Mogaji for your time today, Dr. Udofa for your time today, and Dr. Adamu for your time today. It was absolutely amazing. My name is Genevieve, and look forward to seeing you next month, where we come together. We would have hopefully a webinar this time where we would reel out some more points, but this was very introductory, very exploratory, and very helpful. We will stay back for just a few minutes just to talk to Banta. We'll stop the recording now. You can go back, but we'll email the recording to you. You would also find it on our YouTube page. But thank you for your time this lovely Saturday afternoon, and wish you all the best.